The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 2. The Age of Individualism and Reason. An individualistic age of human society comes as a result of the corruption and failure of the conventional, as a revolt against the reign of the petrified typal figure. Before it can be born, it is necessary that the old truths shall have been lost in the soul and practice of the race, and that even the conventions which ape and replace them shall have become devoid of real sense and intelligence. Stripped of all practical justification, they exist only mechanically, by a fixed idea, by the force of custom, by attachment to the form. It is then that men, in spite of the natural conservatism of the social mind, are compelled at last to perceive that the truth is dead in them, and that they are living by a lie. The individualism of the New Age is an attempt to get back from conventionalism of belief and practice to some solid bedrock, no matter what, of real and tangible truth. And it is necessarily individualistic, because all the old general standards have become bankrupt and can no longer give any inner help. It is therefore the individual who has to become a discoverer, a pioneer, and to search out by his individual reason, intuition, idealism, desire, claim upon life, or whatever other light he finds in himself, the true law of the world and of his own being. By that, when he has found, or thinks he has found it, he will strive to rebase on a firm foundation and remold in a more vital, even if a poorer form, religion, society, ethics, political institutions, his relations with his fellows, his strivings for his own perfection, and his labor for mankind. It is in Europe that the age of individualism has taken birth and exercised its full sway. The East has entered into it only by contact and influence, not from an original impulse, and it is to its passion for the discovery of the actual truth of things, and for the governing of human life, by whatever law of the truth it has found, that the West owes its centuries of strength, vigor, light, progress, irresistible expansion. Equally, it is due not to any original falsehood in the ideals on which its life was founded, but to the loss of the living sense of the truth it once held, and its long, contented slumber in the cramping bonds of a mechanical conventionalism, that the East has found itself helpless in the hour of its awakening. A giant, empty of strength, inert masses of men who had forgotten how to deal freely with facts and forces, because they had learned only how to live in a world of stereotyped thought and customary action. Yet the truths which Europe has found by its individualistic age, covered only the first, more obvious, physical and outward facts of life, and only such of their more hidden realities and powers as the habit of analytical reason and the pursuit of practical utility can give to man. If its rationalistic civilization has swept so triumphantly over the world, it is because it found no deeper and more powerful truth to confront it. For all the rest of mankind was still in the inactivity of the last dark hours of the conventional age. The individualistic age of Europe was in its beginning a revolt of reason, in its culmination a triumphal progress of physical science. Such an evolution was historically inevitable. The dawn of individualism is always a questioning, a denial. The individual finds a religion imposed upon him which does not base its dogma and practice upon a living sense of ever verifiable spiritual truth, but on the letter of an ancient book, the infallible dictum of a pope, the tradition of a church, the learned casuistry of schoolmen and pundits, conclaves of ecclesiastics, heads of monastic orders, doctors of all sorts, all of them unquestionable tribunals whose sole function is to judge and pronounce, but none of whom seems to think it necessary or even allowable to search, test, prove, inquire, discover. He finds that, as is inevitable under such a regime, true science and knowledge are either banned, punished, and persecuted, or else rendered obsolete by the habit of blind reliance on fixed authorities. Even what is true in old authorities is no longer of any value, because its words are learnedly or ignorantly repeated, but its real sense is no longer lived, except at most by a few. In politics, he finds everywhere divine rights, established privileges, sanctified tyrannies, which are evidently armed with an oppressive power and justify themselves by long prescription, but seem to have no real claim or title to exist. In the social order, he finds an equally stereotyped reign of convention, fixed disabilities, fixed privileges, the self-regarding arrogance of the high, the blind prostration of the low, while the old functions, which might have justified at one time such a distribution of status, are either not performed at all, or badly performed, without any sense of obligation, and merely as a part of caste pride. He has to rise in revolt. On every claim of authority he has to turn the eye of a resolute inquisition. When he is told that this is the sacred truth of things, or the command of God, or the immemorial order of human life, he has to reply, "But is it really so? How shall I know that this is the truth of things, and not superstition and falsehood? When did God command it? Or how do I know that this was the sense of his command, and not your error or invention, or that the book on which you found yourself is his word at all, or that he has ever spoken his will to mankind? This immemorial order of which you speak, is it really immemorial, really a law of nature, or an imperfect result of time, and at present a most false convention? And of all you say, still I must ask, does it agree with the facts of the world, with my sense of right, and with my judgment of truth, with my experience of reality? And if it does not, the revolting individual flings off the yoke, declares the truth as he sees it, and in doing so strikes inevitably at the root of the religious, the social, the political, momentarily perhaps even the moral order of the community as it stands, because it stands upon the authority he discredits and the convention he destroys, and not upon a living truth which can be successfully opposed to his own. The champions of the old order may be right when they seek to suppress him as a destructive agency, perilous to social security, political order, or religious tradition. But he stands there, and can no other, because to destroy is his mission, to destroy falsehood, and lay bare a new foundation of truth. But by what individual faculty or standard shall the innovator find out his new foundation, or establish his new measures? Evidently, it will depend upon the available enlightenment of the time, and the possible forms of knowledge to which he has access. At first it was in religion a personal illumination, supported in the West by a theological, in the East by a philosophical reasoning. In society and politics, it started with a crude, primitive perception of natural right and justice, which took its origin from the exasperation of suffering or from an awakened sense of general oppression, wrong, injustice, and the indefensibility of the existing order when brought to any other test than that of privilege and established convention. The religious motive led at first. The social and political, moderating itself after the swift suppression of its first crude and vehement movements, took advantage of the upheaval of religious reformation, followed behind it as a useful ally, and waited its time to assume the lead when the spiritual momentum had been spent and, perhaps by the very force of the secular influences it called to its aid, had missed its way. The movement of religious freedom in Europe took its stand first on a limited, then on an absolute right of the individual experience, and illumined reason to determine the true sense of inspired Scripture and the true Christian ritual and order of the Church. The vehemence of its claim was measured by the vehemence of its revolt from the usurpations, pretensions, and brutalities of the ecclesiastical power, which claimed to withhold the Scripture from general knowledge, and imposed by moral authority and physical violence its own arbitrary interpretation of sacred writ, if not indeed another and substituted doctrine on the recalcitrant individual conscience. In its more tepid and moderate forms, the revolt engendered such compromises as the Episcopalian churches. At a higher degree of fervor, Calvinistic Puritanism. At white heat, a riot of individual religious judgment and imagination in such sects as the Anabaptist, Independent, Socinian, and countless others. In the East, such a movement, divorced from all political or any strongly iconoclastic social significance, would have produced simply a series of religious reformers, illumined saints, new bodies of belief with their appropriate cultural and social practice. In the West, atheism and secularism were its inevitable and predestined goal. At first, questioning the conventional forms of religion, the mediation of the priesthood between God and the soul, and the substitution of papal authority for the authority of the Scripture, it could not fail to go forward and question the Scripture itself, and then all supernaturalism, religious belief, or super-rational truth, no less than outward creed and institute. For eventually, the evolution of Europe was determined less by the Reformation than by the Renaissance. It flowered by the vigorous return of the ancient Greco-Roman mentality of the one, rather than by the Hebraic and religio-ethical temperament of the other. The Renaissance gave back to Europe, on one hand, the free curiosity of the Greek mind, its eager search for first principles and rational laws, its delighted intellectual scrutiny of the facts of life by the force of direct observation and individual reasoning. On the other, the Roman's large practicality and his sense for the ordering of life in harmony with a robust utility and the just principles of these things. But both these tendencies were pursued with a passion, a seriousness, a moral and almost religious ardor, which, lacking in the ancient Greco-Roman mentality, Europe owed to her long centuries of Judeo-Christian discipline. It was from these sources that the individualistic age of Western society sought ultimately for that principle of order and control which all human society needs, and which more ancient times attempted to realize first by the materialization of fixed symbols of truth, then by ethical type and discipline, finally by infallible authority or stereotyped convention. Manifestly, the unrestrained use of individual illumination or judgment, without either any outer standard or any generally recognizable source of truth, is a perilous experiment for our imperfect race. It is likely to lead, rather, to a continual fluctuation and disorder of opinion, than to a progressive unfolding of the truth of things. No less, the pursuit of social justice through the stark assertion of individual rights or class interests and desires, must be a source of continual struggle and revolution, and may end in an exaggerated assertion of the will in each to live his own life and to satisfy his own ideas and desires, which will produce a serious malaise or a radical trouble in the social body.